there wasn't a lot of opportunity for me as a minority or for women. We were in the back of the room, and being in the back of the room gave me a chance to learn how to be able to run the front of the room. One of the things that I definitely want people to understand is the people around you pay the biggest price. So many people think, oh, you're going into business for yourself. That means you're going to have more time. When the reality is, you're going to have less time. Whatever your goal is, it should leave an imprint, and one that is not a scar, but something that is left behind for people to be able to benefit from.
Hello, marginal listeners. So great to have you back with us this week and for a new month. I know I speak for a lot of us, especially those in the United States, when I say that January felt like it was 5,000 weeks rather than 4. So I'm glad to have those come to an end. And as we're kind of embracing the real new year, I think the new year starts February 1st for many of us. I just want to say, while this isn't a political podcast, this is a compassionate podcast. And this is a space where we want to acknowledge and support and create access for marginalized groups. We do that through democratization of information here, through creating a supportive community here. So to the extent you are one of many of the marginalized people in this country and you feel that under the current state of the world, things feel particularly heavy right now, my hope is that this is one facet and one outlet for you to come and feel a little bit more seen, heard, and understood, and embrace, not just accepted, but embraced for who you are. So yeah, I felt that I had to kind of put that out there and say, I'm so happy you're all here. With that, I'm also so happy to share this week's episode with you all. This week, we are sitting down with Sean Atkinson, who's a small business advisor and owner of Majority Media. In our conversation, Sean shares some of his early life experiences at Atlantic Records and what he learned about entrepreneurship from some of the world's biggest pop stars. I can empathize here because I learn a lot from Taylor Swift, just saying. We discuss how he became an active observer of people and someone willing to own processes end to end, both of which paved the way for his agency career. Sean also describes what he and other marginalized groups learned from operating at the back of the room and what ultimately drove him to start creating rooms of his own. If you're interested in entrepreneurship but reject the one-size-fits-all approach to business, then this is definitely the episode for you. Sean, thank you again for all the wisdom you shared with our audiences today, and I just can't wait to get into it. I want to talk about, well, when we first met, I was thrilled because your name is spelled exactly the same as my husband's, Sean.
Hmm.
And you were actually the first to mention to me, you know what? It's a Sean thing. There's just something about us collective Seans, there's something about us. And I knew from that moment on that we would have a pretty special connection.
It is a Sean thing. I know other people don't like to hear it, but amongst us Seans, we understand it, especially the SEANs. When we see some of the other
Exactly.
spellings, it's just like, okay. So
Yeah.
great conversation. I can't say enough how much I've been looking forward to this.
Me as well. And I would love what we didn't talk about in that conversation. And thank
Mm,
goodness we didn't, because we're going to get my reactions real time on this podcast. We really didn't dive into your background. I know a bit about what you do now with Majority Media.
mhm,
Again, we're going to dive into that a little bit later, but I don't really know about the inception of how this work
mm.
came to be and really much about your childhood at all, Sean. So if it's okay with you, I'd love to start at the very beginning, even pre-business. What was early childhood like for Sean, and how did that pave the way for what you do now?
Sure. Old soul that asked a lot of questions. And my mother always said, well, I'll put it to you this way. I got in trouble one good time where she said, well, so and so did this. And I said, well, they said they want to do it. So I followed them. And she was like, well, if somebody jumped off a bridge, would you do it? Like, you're supposed to ask follow-up questions. And from that point on, I never liked disappointing my mother, so when she explained it to me that way, it was something where it was like, "Oh, okay." And then it's careful what you wish for, because then I asked a whole bunch of questions to make sure that I understood what I was getting myself into. So I would say my origin story really starts when she started working at Atlantic Records and Echo Records, which is now Elektra Records. And that was when I was about 6, 7 years old. So
Wow.
I got an introduction into that world very, very early, and, one of the first lessons I got was my mother laying down the rules of what's acceptable when I would go to her job. So, where people here in music industry, they're like, "Oh, it must be great to meet the stars," and, "Oh, you must get a lot of free records." Those were 2 rules right off from the beginning, like, don't go running up to people and, acting like some kind of fan, and 2, don't run around asking people for free music. So I had to find other ways to be able to entertain myself. And one of the ways that I entertained myself was visiting her at work. And when she worked there, she was working in the data processing team. So I got to be there when they were running the reports and see which reports each team was running. And then I would ask questions like, well, why are they running this report? Why is this one weekly? Why is this monthly? Oh, they're running this report. What is this report? And after a certain point, like any good parent, she was as patient as she could until she finally got to, I don't know, Sean, go ask somebody. And then that's when I would actually go with them when they would finish the reports and go around to deliver them. And then I can actually get those actual follow up questions. So, my introduction to the process and understanding things from the back end of the business started really, really early. And being able to ask those kind of questions from people that you normally don't get access to gives you a whole lot of understanding. So I got that understanding really, really early in life, and then it was just a matter of being able to start to apply it.
Can we just pause and talk about what a powerhouse it sounds like your mother is? She worked
Mhm.
in data processing for Atlantic Records. What time was this? Was this the 80s?
End of the 70s, going through the 80s, and, yeah, it was just something where it was a great time music-wise. Atlantic Records, more so Warner Brothers was the parent company, so,
Yep.
as a kid, like, oh my goodness, the company picnics and all the different things that they used to do, it's different now, the way that they kind of handle business, but it was really hard to get into, but it was very much a family once you were part of the family. So, like I knew people that grew out to be really big and people that were already big, and they like, oh, Sean, I knew you ever since you were a little kid. And being a little kid that ran into people's offices, and my mother was like, "Oh my god, I'm so sorry. I know he was." No, it's okay, it's okay. So, I've known most of them, like Mella Winter, Doug Morris, Sylvia Rohn, ever since I was like 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. So, as I got older and I interned, and then I started working there myself, it was really one of those things of there was a level of familiarity and
Mhm.
comfort, so I could continue to ask the questions that I need to be able to ask.
And that exposure is incredible. I
Mm,
mean, just being at the back end of a business like that from such an early age and being able to pose those questions. I mean, some folks don't get that level of exposure even at their first internships out of college. So
right.
I'm sure that was super foundational to you just being able to familiarize yourself with business
Mhm.
processes and start to grasp, oh, this is something that I could not just take part of, but I could help inform.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It was something where when you're in the building, you understand the business side of music. Outside of the building, there are a lot of people that focus on the music business. So that's where it's people say, "Oh, it must be great to meet these stars and all the rest of that." What I found fascinating were the people that actually worked behind the scenes, because they were the people that understood the audience enough to be able to say, "We have an audience that we need to find a star for, or we have talent that we need to find an audience for," and know how to be able to make that happen. So that's part of understanding the process to know it doesn't matter which end you're at. It's understanding the process well enough to be able to know how to be able to find the valuable pieces within it and then how to be able to monetize it.
Yeah, and I think too, a taken for granted thing is that even in the arts, even in the creative industries, like it is fueled by data. Data drives decision making regardless of what industry you're in.
Mhm.
So I love how that brings that to a conscious level of awareness too. Like there was a very methodical approach to understanding what artists you'd take on, what audiences you'd appeal to based on the work that your mom was doing in the back end, which again doesn't get talked about very much, but those functions exist in every industry.
They do. And one of the things that I realized is as I got older and I started working there, I figured out that one of the hardest things to sell are people because people talk and people do things. So I got the best practices and a lot of the things that I wanted to be able to learn from talking to the different teams. And when I would drop off reports, when I was interning, I would say, okay, well, here's this report. What were you looking for? And then I got to a certain point where I could have a conversation and be in a room where someone says, oh, yeah, we're running into this problem. And my response could be, well, did you try running this report? Because in that report, you'd be able to find this, this, and this. And it's like,
Mhm.
well, where did you learn that from? I've been looking at you guys do it for years. So when the newer people came in, it allowed me to be able to add value and be able to get into certain rooms. But the real thing for me was understanding the process well enough to know that people are very hard to sell. because as a brand, things change. One of the examples that I give when I talk to small business owners and making sure that they understand the path that they're choosing to be on is think of the music artists that come on and they'll put a song out and they're not thinking about the fact that it could be 10, 15, 20, in some cases 30 years later, and people are still going to want them to sing that song with the same level of feeling and emotion that they did when they initially put it out. And that's why sometimes you go to concerts, and when you go to concert, they stick the mic out to the audience because they've been singing that song forever. And it could be something that where, it was an experience that broke their heart. Imagine people wanting the expectations of you giving that your all, the same level of feeling when you were going through it again. So it's similar when you think about small business owners. You have to be mindful of what you go out into, what you present to the world, because once you put it out there, it's out there. And they take a hold of it and use it, and they take that narrative and run with it. So be mindful of what you put out. And one of the things that I really try to stress is find something that you can do when you're on an off day. Because if you can do
Mm.
it when you're not really playing to your strengths, when you're distracted, when you've got all these other things going on, but it's still one of your gifts, then it's something that you can do and nobody else will really feel slighted because you're having an off day. They might not even know.
Wow, my mind is blown because would have never thought that there's so many like vibrant parallels
Mhm.
between the music industry and other facets of business, but you're so right, and this is something I think about a lot,
Mhm.
is musical artists who write songs about heartbreak, or they write love songs intended for a person who they think they're gonna spend the rest of their life with, and then they don't, but then they need to continue to play to that audience, sing that song.
Mhm.
How can you make sure you have staying power if your product or service or your song was created under one set of circumstances, but the demand continues for it, right? Like, how can you continue to deliver on that? And I think it gets into this notion of, we've talked about it, I think, too, in some of our previous conversations, like, you have to evolve, right?
Yeah.
Because you're going to change and your market's going to change. So
Mhm.
rather than thinking about just product market fit, like, yes, you want to build something with staying power and longevity and that you as a business owner feel that you can do for a long time, but you're going to have to evolve it no matter what. So how can you not just have product market fit, but like product market flex? How can you
Yes.
adapt and
Yes.
flex to the needs of the audience over time? And I'm sure that musical artists do this too. I mean, they create remixes of songs.
Yeah.
They do new collaborations. They give their songs new life to kind of appeal to the new demands of
Mhm.
audiences. So now I'm just having these light bulb moments of all the ways that, yeah, music can potentially inform other types of business ownership.
It absolutely does. It's something where you get a clear vision of building a brand. Like I was talking to a small business owner and she was saying, "Well, I don't really like to, be in front of the camera." And one of the things that like we just covered, like as much as I realize that the music business is being in front of the camera, the business of music is being behind the camera. So what I explained to her is, well, you don't necessarily have to be in front of the camera in order to be able to promote your business. You can do narrations. You can have your voice involved in it and still give people that feel, that connection without you actually being in front of the camera and having those awkward moments. So there's so many different ways to be able to approach some of it. And I find the music industry is one that a lot of people can relate to because in most cases people can relate to music. So when you start to be able to talk about things like evolving, think about the artists that want to be able to do different types of music and their fan base is like, what is this? Like this was my favorite album and now you're going in this different direction. Who said you could do that? And you have to kind of fight with them to be able to bring them along for that, or you have to be able to say, okay, well, I still have to throw a couple of songs on that allow people to be able to get that slow song or that pace or whatever it was that you loved about me, but I still need to be able to introduce this new thing because I don't want to just be put into that box. I need to be able to grow and evolve. So it's the same thing as it would be for an artist. It happens for businesses. It's something where
Yeah.
you can kind of get to a point where you grow to a certain point, and then you realize there's a ceiling there, and you have to figure out how to be able to pivot so that you can continue to scale.
Yeah, much like there's different genres of music and you get artists who switch genres. I mean, I can't not think about Taylor Swift in this example.
Mhm.
Like, your product or service is going to evolve with time too. And I think a big piece of it too is a lot of it comes back to people, much like there's processes behind business at their core, there's people behind
Mhm.
businesses too. And it's like, what are you buying into when you're evangelizing a business or a service? You're buying into the people behind that business. And if that can be your through line as a business owner, that's incredibly, incredibly powerful. So I can absolutely see how your early beginnings in the music industry laid the foundation
Mhm.
for you to be able to help entrepreneurs in the way that you do. But tell me what happened. So you didn't stay at Atlantic Records forever, did you?
Mhm.
Like, what was the next season of your career like?
Right. Well, growing up as a kid, I not only loved the music, the business side of music, but I loved music. So I used to play the violin, cello, bass when I was younger, and then I got tall. So by the time I got to high school, they were like, "Yeah, no, you need to play basketball." So I ended up going to a school that didn't have orchestra and didn't have some of the things that I was used to being able to have. So it forced me to kind of broaden my horizons. Same thing happened with the music industry. I got to the point where I realized the business side of music was killing my love of music. So I needed to be able to kind of shift over to do something else. And one of the upsides was, like I said, it's a lot harder to be able to sell a person than it is to sell a product or a service because, people evolve. They have good days, bad days. Products and services pretty much are what they are. So what I wanted to do was take those best practices and see if I could apply them to different things. And if what I knew or what I thought I knew was enough to be able to allow me to be able to switch over to fashion and switch over to this industry and that industry and learn the process because I learned the process there, but I wanted to see if it applied to different industries and the process in general. And it turns out it does in a lot of ways. So for me, I left there and then I went over to the agency side. So well, actually, that's to be fair. Ended up at the agency side. I left there doing internships, moved to California, and then got out there and realized you can't get around without a car. And again, it was something where I moved out there. My father played basketball. He played college for the Kansas Jayhawks. So he realized I got a son that plays basketball. My older brother is like a model. So his thing is, I'm not getting anybody that loves sports. And then here comes his son saying, "Oh, I love sports. I play basketball." So he was in love with the fact that I did. But what ended up happening is similar to the love of music. I started playing for a guy that like we practiced first thing in the morning for like 2 hours, then after school for like 4 hours. The love of basketball left me. I was just like, this is a job now, and I don't get paid for it.
Mhm.
So it was something where I wanted to branch out and I said, you know what? I'm smarter than just running up and down the court. I want to be able to do something else. So the moment I quit basketball, I had to get a job. And that job ended up being someone that did marketing research in the mall. And I would go
Okay.
around and ask people if they had time for a survey. And I had to learn how to be able to read the room. So I took what I learned from understanding audiences and how to be able to attract them and what to look for and things like that. And then started applying that to real time and real world, where at that job, if you don't close enough interviews, you don't keep your job. So I
Right.
had to learn there were certain people when they came into the mall, you're not someone to catch when you first walk in. You're someone to catch after you've been there for a minute and I can watch you as you navigate through the mall. So there would be some people that would be busy, and if they were anything like me, there were some people that were taller than their friends. So I would watch their friends go into the mall, and some of them walk out with a whole bunch of bags, and then some would walk into a store gleefully and then walk out realizing that they didn't carry their size. That was an easy one for me. So I could say, you know what? Here's why I'm asking these questions. Brands want to know that they're not carrying your size. How many times are you going to walk into that same store and have them say, you know what, I'm sorry, we just don't have it.
Wow.
So it made it easier for me to figure out how to be able to close and do things like that. So as much as I'm not a salesperson, I'm a result-driven, solution-oriented person. So I learned how to be able to present the solution and then say, now here's the challenge, here's the solution. Now help me figure out how to be able to make it easier for you. And one of the things that I explain to people is when you can make the inconvenient convenient, people are willing to pay you for it.
Completely. I think going back to you saying you're not a salesperson,
Mm,
which I think arguably maybe you are without even realizing it.
mm,
I think one of your superpowers, particularly when we go back to that market research job, is you are a great observer of people. I mean, I think there's so many people who wouldn't even identify that pattern that tall people consistently walk out of stores empty-handed.
Mm,
I think if you can really fiercely pay attention to people and identify their problem statements and talk to them in a way that makes them feel almost as though you're in their head.
yeah.
Like you're identifying the problems I'm having without me even realizing it, right? Like you are appealing to me in ways that I can't even understand how you're able to understand that. That's when people feel incredibly drawn to you, right? Like you really want to almost like live inside your customers' heads in the most non-invasive way possible. And it seems like that's what you were doing. And then that goes from a line of questioning feeling inconvenient to
Mhm.
feeling like, oh, you actually are potentially solving a very real problem I'm having right now.
Yeah, and it taught me the customer journey, not the typical one that you see out there, but the one that's more like Bob Mester's customer journey, where you're planting the thought that someone might not even know that there's a challenge that they need to address. So the passive looking, active looking, like there's earlier stages to the know, like, trust that people don't really discuss.
Hmm.
There are things that, like I said, there are challenges that people may not know that there's an option for. Sometimes you
Right.
get into it is what it is mode and you don't think that you need to seek something out. But when you can figure out how to make something inconvenient convenient, then all of a sudden it's like, well, wait a second. I got so used to just thinking that it's just going to be that way, but now you're telling me there's another option. I'm
Yep.
curious. And then that's where empathy and things like that start to kick in. So what I my version of marketing is really just making sure that people feel heard. And that's what I
Yes.
learned from doing the market research in the mall. When people feel heard, they're willing to be able to answer every single question that you'll ask them because they know that you're actually going to do something with it. And as far as superpowers, I would say that is it. Like I
Yeah.
don't want to forget what it's like to be a consumer as a business owner. So when I'm doing something, I'm thinking of what kind of experience do I want to have? In addition to everybody else that I might want to be able to have as an ideal customer. So I think it's important to be able to keep track of those things as you're working your way through it. You don't want to get so caught up in your business idea that you're forgetting that it's about the actual customer. So that's why I said it's flipped for a small business owner. Instead of it being supply and demand, it's demand and supply. You need to make sure they actually care about what it is that you're bringing to market because otherwise, you've got a really long sales process of trying to figure out how to be able to get them to care. And that whole time, your business is out there and you're spending out of your savings. So it's a little bit different.
Yeah, I mean, if you're trying to evangelize a solution or convince
Mhm.
people if you're trying to get them to also like radically shift the way that they behave to get them to use your product, that's a type of business you can do that. But like you
Mhm.
said, a lot of particularly like minority owned businesses or folks who don't have a ton of generational wealth or a lot of
Yeah.
capital reserves, they don't have the time to spend to wait for the market to catch up to
Mhm.
what they're selling. So if you can identify like a burning problem statement that someone's having right now, you can meet their demand so much quicker. You don't have to create the demand. You can actually solve very existent problems that are happening today. All right, so that market research job, it sounds like you're killing it. I'm sure you're exceeding quota. Where
Mhm.
do we go from there?
So from there, I ended up moving back to New York, and then that's when I started working for the ad agencies because I want to stay in the mix, and I had the marketing research background, so I was able to get in. And one of the things that I always tell small business owners if the front door is not open, check for a window.
Mhm.
Where I got back, and it was really hard to be able to just walk in and say, "Well, I want to be able to work for," in this case, Saatchi and Saatchi. What I learned was they have temp work and consultants and things that they bring in. So I will go in and do a temp job, and then go in and show them what I can actually do. And then that's how I was able to actually get in. So I did an end run around going through the front door, and I went in and started doing the work, and then it made it easier for me to be able to get the job. So I started learning the importance of what an agency meant back then to brands. It's a little different now because now we have a different level of access. Brands and the audience almost have a direct consumer type of thing going on now. So agencies aren't as
Mm.
relevant as they used to be. But back in those days, the brand needed the agency to introduce them to the audience and then give them the information back. I think one of the funny things is as I went through my career, I learned really early on, working for Condé Nast. I'm going to say I might have been 23 to 25. I remember working at GQ magazine, and it was something where we were a younger crew, like a lot of the assistants and things like that. But then there were some people that were in their 30s. And we were a tight clique. So we would go out, and then the people that were in their 30s would go, I don't want to be the old guy or the old girl here. You know what I mean? Like I appreciate you inviting me, but I feel awkward. And then I look awkward hanging out with you guys and stuff like that. And then that's when it occurred to me, I need to have an exit strategy because I could very easily end up being that guy. That's when I realized, well, what is the process? Like, so I started to pay attention to say, well, I need to learn as much as I can because what I figured out was most of the people figure out all of the things that they're going to learn and then they semi retire on the brand side. So you gather all the information that you need to know and then you take it over to the brand side. And that's why you're seeing a lot of the agencies start to fall off because all of that information is now in the brand's hands.
I my last startup before we pivoted to CalPal, we worked with a number of agencies, and yeah, a lot of that information and that knowledge can get institutionalized on the brand side. And I think now, particularly in the current ecosystem, a lot of the work that agencies used to do, it is being automated, right?
Yeah.
I think the work is now becoming a bit more strategic, and there's
Hmm.
absolutely a place for agencies to be doing that work, but the types of work agencies are doing needs to change in order for
Hmm.
them to have staying power. And the cost of advertising is going up, right? Like there's mounting CPMs, and if you don't have the unit economics in your business to withstand those rising variable costs, advertising's not an option. And then, like you said, there's ways that certain brands can do a lot of their own organic marketing,
Hmm.
and don't need to rely on an agency to do that for them. So everything you're saying, it completely tracks. And yeah, I'm not going to lie. I mean, there was a part of me too in my agency days where I looked around and I asked, how much staying power does this have in general? So I completely understand the desire to kind of, spread your proverbial wings and
Hmm.
potentially pursue something new coming from an agency background.
Yeah, it can be tough. I think one of the things that's been harder for people is normally when you go into the agency, I look at an agency as a gateway to all the different avenues that you can take. Where this is, if you do it right, you can kind of go in and learn, well, I like the publishing side a little bit more, or I like the brand side a little bit more, or I really just want to focus on the marketing and advertising part. Like you get to touch so many different parts of the business that it gives you the opportunity to be able to figure out what it is that you actually enjoy. For those that are paying attention to that, they get to choose their career as opposed to having it chosen for them. So,
Right.
from a consulting standpoint and from a marginalized standpoint, when I got into it, there wasn't a lot of opportunity for me as a minority or for women. When I got into it, we were in the back of the room. And a lot of times we were the ones with the ideas and we had to present the ideas to people to actually have it move forward. So they weren't going to give us the credit for it. We just needed to know that if it was a good enough idea we want to have brought to market, you don't necessarily have to have your name on it. It's one of those things you'll know that it was you. So that kind of goes back to the music industry side of things, where for me, I have a real appreciation for being behind the camera. I don't necessarily need the glory. I just need to know that that idea that I had in my head, I was able to put that out there and now other people are benefiting from it. Now, if you do it well, you can profit from it. But in other cases, my profit was the experience of being in the room, knowing what's being said in the room, knowing that most deals get made in rooms before it even gets made public. So if you've never been in the room, then you don't know the conversations that are being had. You don't know how the process works within that room with different teams like agencies and people get together and they'll go out to dinner or something like that and a whole deal will be put together and it never actually got made public. So for the people in the on waiting for something to be posted, it may never get posted because the right people got in the right room at the right time and you were able to take care of that. So that's one of the reasons why I stress the importance of networking and knowing the process to know where people fall within it because so many people look at everyone else as competitors, but there are people that do different things and you can rely on their expertise to create a seamless process. And if you create that seamless process, you're making it convenient to the point where you're creating a great experience and everybody wins that way.
Totally. Can we talk about, so you were in the back of the room, which
Mm.
is very unfortunate. But I think at the same time, what you're saying is you were in that room
Yes.
when you were at those dinners. What is the advice for folks who aren't being invited to the rooms, aren't being invited to the dinners? They're just behind, they're on the other side of the doors where those conversations are being had, when their processes are playing out. So
Mm.
they're not even getting that exposure, or their ideas aren't even like kind of penetrating those
Mhm.
walls. How do they get themselves a seat at those tables?
Great question. I think accessibility has changed. It was so exclusive before they created the rooms. Now you can create your own room. This is like the birth of influencers. Influencers fly in the face of people in a room. If we go back to record labels as an example, you don't see record labels as large anymore because now there's independent artists. Now there's streamers, there's all these other things. So the important thing to understand about the process, and one of the reasons why I was so excited about this conversation, is when you understand the process, you can find out where you bring the most value and then monetize that in the actual process. So where record labels were the distributors, once you realize you didn't need them for your marketing and your advertising and doing all the setup, then you just said, okay, well, I'm going to do all of this part, and then I'll just pay you to distribute it and make sure that it gets to all the people that I need it to get to. So all of a sudden, you start making more money as opposed to only getting paid to do tours. And it's the
Yeah,
same thing when it comes to other businesses. Like the more you know how to be able to take on your own, the less you need them to be able to take care of the other parts. And the better you become at those specific tasks, the more you start to become someone that they have to rely on. And that's why now you start to see some of these bigger companies go, we don't want to spend the marketing budget to try to figure all of this stuff out. There's an influencer that already figured it out. We'll sponsor you. We'll give you free products, do reviews. This is how they've been able to kind of work around it. And we're in the era of content creation. So AI has hurt some businesses, but in ways where the more expertise you have, the more you'll be able to adjust. The way that I look at it is they lowered the entry point so more businesses can start. But what they've done is they've made it so that the people that knew just enough may get hurt, but the people that actually took the time to learn the industry and things that they're in, they'll be fine because either you can create a product or a service that makes it easier for the people that are going in to be able to do something, or you become an educator and guide them through the things that they need to be able to know.
absolutely. You were at this agency and you
Mhm,
realized that you were kind of hitting a would you say you feared that you would hit a ceiling,
mhm.
like you wanted to build your competencies outside of the agency life? Like where did you go from there at that point when you were in your agency career?
I wanted to learn every different facet because I one of the things I learned from being in the back of the room was all the people that were in the room. And I would look at the people that had the sour puss on their face because they're like, "Why am I even here?" And my thing is, when I get a chance to run a room, I don't want to see that look on anybody's face. So I want to know what AdOps does, and that's when I learned about pushes and things like that to understand that as important as the point of contact is, most of the time the point of contact is great, but AdOps is the one that's actually going to push through that advertising campaign that you need. And if you don't acknowledge what their rules are and things like that, you can sell a deal, but the deal won't be implemented until they decide it's implemented. So you had them in a room and you ignored them and you didn't acknowledge their existence, and then you want them to prioritize something for you. So my thing was the time that I spent in the back of the room, I took the time to learn everybody that was in the room, to know
Mm,
what everyone did, at least enough to be able to have a conversation with them. So by the time I got to being able to run a presentation or run a room, I knew to walk in and say, you know what? I'll give you an example. I remember going into Univision for a project, and the salespeople would go in, and I was the account manager, then the program manager, and the solutions architect. All the fancy titles to say you go with the salesperson and make sure that they don't sell something that we can't deliver.
rep.
And I would go in
Yep.
and basically listen to what it is that they said, see if it matched up with what we had, and if it was something that didn't, and it didn't really seem like something we could monetize, then I could say, "Well, I hear what he's saying, but I'm the one that's actually gonna be the one that's managing your account. So, I think this would be the best fit out of these options." Now, what I can tell you is, I can bring this back to the product team and let them know that this is something that you're asking for, and we can either see if we can make this a one-off or if this is something that other people are asking for and turn it into a new product or a service. So
Right.
that again, goes back to people feeling heard. So
Yeah.
being in the back of the room gave me a chance to learn how to be able to run the front of the room. And that's really what I learned from that. So I didn't see it necessarily as a detriment. There were people that said, make the most of this time, because
Mm.
when you're in front of the room, you don't have time to figure it out. By then, you need to have figured it out. And this is why Condé Nast was so important. Back in the days when it was the joke of Condé Nast was condescending and nasty. So,
Oh,
it was not an
yep.
easy place to be able to work. It was not an easy place to get into. It was very much you have to be the best and the brightest to be able to be here. And if you're not, then there's all these other places that you can work, but you won't get to do that here. So it's different now where before they didn't hire assistants to be account managers and things like that. You had to go out, make a name for yourself, and come back. So even when you paid your dues and all the rest of that, you still had to leave, create a actual client list that when you brought back, they could say, okay, so you're coming in with money. You're not necessarily just waiting for us to be able to give you a book of business. You're coming in with
Wow.
something where we know you're going to be able to generate it.
And again, to that point of owning things, understanding how
Mhm.
they are and how that ultimately becomes your superpower, right? Because then you can be the person that is familiarized with these processes. Like you said, there is kind of a magic in being in the back of the room or being someone a little bit more executional. I think a lot of times we think of those periods in our career when we're on the front lines as, you're just kind of you're just kind of doing your time until you
Mhm.
can advance in your career, but it's like no, that's when you really develop a very material understanding of how
Yes.
the job is actually done.
Yes.
And some people, I mean, it's crazy. You can tell if you go work for an organization where your manager's never done the job you're
Yeah.
doing.
Absolutely.
So I can completely understand how all of that you harness that and you use that as your ability to advance that much further in your career. And like you said, once you are owning the room, speaking in the room, you can't be as observant. You can't
Mhm.
even understand the systems within which you're operating because you're so actively operating in them. You can't kind of take a step back and objectify, okay, how are all these pieces kind of
Mhm.
intersecting and how is this product actually coming to be? So when you left the agency space,
Mhm.
where did you go from there? And ultimately, how did you come to start Majority Media and counsel small business owners on your own?
Great question. I went from the agency side to the brand side and then to the publishing side because I wanted to know what it was like from the perspective of the people that had the money and the perspective of people that had the audience, because those are different experiences. The people that have the money are trying to gather information. The people that have the audience are trying to find the right people to put in front of them without alienating the actual audience. So all of those things were done with the intention of knowing that after a certain point, I kept running into people where they would say, "Oh, you work in advertising? I'd love to be able to work with you." And small business owners were never going to be able to work at the places that they were never going to get business at the places I work. Every time I would go back, they say they don't make enough money and we don't have enough time. So
Mm,
even when they said it would be a mid market, and well, we can create something mid market. So if they're up around like six figures, we can probably figure something out, and they would let me know. They would say, "Oh, well, we'll allow you to be able to run that team." And then when it didn't come to fruition, I realized I was just continuing to be able to help people achieve their dreams, but I was actually hurting the people that were actually out there trying to be able to do it. So, majority media is really just my way of saying the majority of businesses are small businesses. So, it's a play on the word, but it's also me saying I left that world behind so that I can actually help all the people that would actually benefit from seeing it the most. So I love the
yeah,
aha moments of being able to see that light bulb go off with someone where they're like, so I really can do this. Yeah, you can. It's just you have to understand the path that you're on and how to best align it with what your circumstances are. So that kind of goes back to where I said there's different types of entrepreneurs. There's the assimilators, someone that went into a pre-existing market because they wanted to mitigate risks. If you're someone that doesn't really have savings and you can't really afford to mess around, but so much, then you want to go into something that already exists and figure out how to carve out a little bit for yourself. If you're someone
yeah,
that is maybe a little more open to risk, then there's innovators and disruptors. Innovators are creating something brand new. So that goes back to you saying it's really hard to get someone to be able to change a habit. You
Hmm.
have to be able to convince them that there's a better way and then show them at the same time. Innovators have a tough job because they're taking what's in their head and they're trying to put that same image into someone else's head. So that sales process is longer. But the reward is bigger because you're basically starting something that never existed and you will own that space until other people start to come in. And then you still have the privilege of being able to say, we've been doing this
Yeah.
forever. So even when they come in and they say that there's another way to be able to do it, you still have that to fall back on. And then there's the disruptors that basically say, there's a better way to do something that already exists. So that
Right.
one is equally as difficult, if not more, because you're trying to introduce new habits, but then you're also rocking the boat for the existing businesses. So they have every reason to want to crush you, and the audience has every reason not to want to listen to you. So it's even riskier. But for those that figure it out, it's very rewarding because you actually set the new precedents and it allows you to be able to kind of run with it from there. So I think you have to know what kind of person that you are, what your surrounding situation is, and take those things into consideration, especially for marginalized people that you're not going to get the extra funding. You're not going to get all the extra help. So you have to figure more out on the front end so that you don't have to deal with it on the back end. Because the reality is the failure rate goes up as your business goes on. It doesn't go down. Where it
Yeah.
starts off where what is it, around like 20%, it continues to go up over the years. Those are things that you have to take into consideration. And the knee jerk reaction is to rush to market. And you can do a soft launch. You can do a minimum viability product where you kind of soft test it. But if you jump with both feet and you don't think through your business model, you don't think through some of the things that you need to know, then that's what leads to rebrands, and that can break a business.
Before we go any further there, because
Mm,
that's an incredible insight as well. I think two things that became apparent in kind of the last leg of your journey there, which is still ongoing, was that one, you decided you wanted to start building for a different set of people,
mhm,
and that was minority-owned business owners, basically the businesses that these large agencies were turning away.
yeah,
And you're actually not the first person to have built a business out of that I've had on this show, and then me as well.
mhm,
I used to work in big tech, and yeah, there were certain clients that couldn't get into our books of business if they weren't spending a certain amount of money on advertising. But that's not to say that they're not entitled to some of the resources that even the biggest brands in the world are. So I think that's completely relatable and also a very smart tactic because that is an underserved market.
mhm,
You saw opportunity that yes, you might have to work with more of these business owners, but there's scalability. There's a lot of them that are being neglected by these other service providers who can kind of swoop in and meet that demand.
mhm,
Um, Two, I also love that you reject this idea, and I'm sure this, is very much tied to the fact that you're working with these small business owners. You reject the idea, not only that you need to be spending a certain amount of money to be serviced as a business owner, but you also reject the idea that there's only one type of business ownership. There's
yeah,
only one type of personality profile that lends itself to entrepreneurship. And I actually think that's pretty radical because you and I have talked about this. There is this internet discourse around these playbooks for
mhm,
business owners, like these different doctrines that you can follow to be successful. And that's just not a viability for most people. And is that to say that most people shouldn't start their own businesses? So I love that you're also democratizing entrepreneurship to people who have felt before precluded from the conversation because of their financial situation or their personality type.
mhm. Your limits shouldn't be what other put on you. Like, your limits are gonna be what you basically what you put on yourself. So, if I'm talking to someone that's an introvert, I'm doing something custom for you. If I'm talking to someone that has a bunch of friends, I'm going to say, okay, well, here's how you can monetize using your friends. Instead of saying, I want you to keep buying from me, turn them into brand champions and reward them for all the friends of friends that they bring in. Because having friends buy from you is not the same as having friends of friends and friends of friends of friends. Like, that's where you
Right.
actually build your audience. And that's where you tend not to be as annoying as the typical small business owner that would expect their friends to buy all their hoodies and all the rest of the things that they put out over and over and over again. You can space that out further, and then you can really focus on making sure that you have a solution that not only helps people, but it creates a really great experience for them. So
Yeah.
I think it's really important to understand what your circumstances are and then build something around that. because that's something that, your circumstances to a certain extent aren't going to change immediately. Like, you're working to change your circumstances. So if you don't take them into consideration in your business model, like, let's say someone has a limited budget and not a lot of people that are willing to step in and help them. Your sales process is most likely going to be longer. So you probably want to think about, how long is the sales process? How long can I wait to be able to get enough sales to pay myself? If it's something where it's a longer process, then maybe that needs to stay a side hustle for a little bit longer, because you're going to need the money to be able to finance the time it takes for you to build your business up, as opposed to jumping with both feet.
Yeah, I love that you talk about this. That type of like optionality is so important, and I think that again runs counter to a lot of the narrative we hear, which is if you don't quit everything to start your business, you're not all in on your business. And I
Right.
think that is one of the most damaging, dangerous narratives we can push, particularly on socially marginalized folks. You do not need to burn through your savings to be an entrepreneur. And now more folks are talking about it,
Mhm.
but you can have portfolio businesses. And as far as I'm concerned, if you are architecting areas of your life so that you can continue to build the thing you want to build, to me, that connotes that you are all in on your business
Mhm.
because you are actually rearranging other parts of your life to do
Exactly.
is most important to you. So again, I just love that we're illuminating all of these different ways that
Mhm.
entrepreneurship can look and how there's different forms it can shapes it can take based on not just your personality but your level of resourcing. I guess Sean, is there any type of personality that you would dissuade from starting a business?
Personal preference? Like, there are certain types of business owners that kind of just rub me the wrong way. Are you asking about
Okay, let's get
those?
it. Sure, let's get into it. Yeah.
Those that want to be business owners in name only and just kind of get in the way of other people. Those that
Mm,
compete against other people, that and don't really make the effort to be able to do anything with their business. Like, I have friends that it's the weirdest thing. They've got this silent competition going on amongst each other. And it's one of those things of, if we're competing, someone has to win and somebody has to lose. And I don't want
right.
anybody to lose. Why can't we all
Mm,
just figure out how to be able to collect our resources and everybody wins? So that kind
right.
of goes back to understanding the process and networking. I want to work with people that, let's say, for example, brand strategists. If I know that I'm talking to someone and they want to build out their business and they either have a website or they don't have a website, I can give them the strategy and then I can hand them off to a web designer that can deliver exactly what it is that they're looking for. I
Right.
would rather hand them off to someone and give them what they need, so that that web designer can deliver a better product, and that you're making sure that the customer has the best experience start to finish, and it
Right.
lines them up to be able to be even that much more successful. So there's a lot of ways to be able to go about your business. It's really just a matter of finding the ways that align with what you're trying to get done. The main thing that I try to tell people is the destination is the destination. The game is the game. The only thing that changes is your path to be able to get from point A to point B. So it's not something that's set in stone where you have to do it this way. It's something where you can create your own path. You can follow other people's footsteps. There's a lot of different ways to go about it. You just have to find the path of least resistance for you.
And you have to be honest with yourself
Mm,
about the level of resources you can expend, the level of emotional reserves you're willing to dedicate. It's about being really honest with yourself about what can you tolerate and like what will actually move you through your business. If you are just in it for money day one, like that is something that I say to a lot of business owners. Like if it is really all about the money, entrepreneurship might actually not be the path to accelerate your income. Actually, in all honesty, it's probably won't. Like you can build long-term wealth. You could absolutely build generational wealth, but in the beginning, you're going to be expending a lot of resources. And so I think it's just being really honest with yourself about like what you're capable of giving and what will actually get you up every day. And how does that align with like what your business can viably provide for you, especially in the early days?
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, part of the series that I've been having with SBDC was walking them through that. That's why I covered the entrepreneurial types, because what I explain to them is, if you're a nurturer, if you're someone that has a certain level of understanding of something, then you might want to do services. It's a longer sales process, but you're educating. So if you're someone that doesn't have patience and you're very transactional, then you probably want to
Yep.
sell a product, because once you hand that to them, technically that process is done. So it's like,
Hmm.
know yourself to know what you can do and what you can't do. Know yourself to know what you like to do, what you don't like to do. Um, I'm someone that, to a certain extent, I am transactional, but I love the aha moment. So I had to find something where it was kind of a happy medium, and that's done with you. So instead of handing someone a DIY and saying, here, I want to actually check in and make sure that things are working out. So that's where things like coaching come in. That's where people do programs and things like that. So you have to know your personality to be able to understand what you're able to do and where your gifts are. So again, it's understanding the process of people's learning. If you understand the customer journey, some people um, they can they can focus their business strictly on the early stages. You don't have to be the person that delivers the best solution. You can just be the person that introduces them to something that they never knew was an option. And
Hmm.
you can do perfectly fine doing just like that. There are business coaches out there. They're not telling you exactly how to be able to make that money in some cases. They're telling you the things that you don't know that you need to know. So then this way
Yeah,
you can if there some cases, let's go back to for a second where you network and you create a system to be able to guide someone through that whole path. So it could be a business coach that says, okay, well now you need a brand strategist. They may call me and say, you know what, I have this person that got this business idea. Now I need someone to kind of walk them through how to be able to set it up and make sure that they have everything right. And then hand them to the next person, and hand them to the next person. That is a great experience for a business coach to be able to give someone, as
of
opposed
course.
to, I'm going to give you this and say, here, and you let me know
Yeah.
how it works out on the back end. So you have to know like your personality. And if you can align something with your personality, then it's always going to shine through. Those
Yeah.
educators, those nurturers are gonna be people that should probably do services. It means that you probably have a little more patience, so when people aren't getting it, you're not gonna be so irritated that you're just like, "Ugh, I can't do this." And then you also have to be patient to the extent that with services, that means that you also need to have that foundation, because with services, you don't get paid upfront. Products, you hand them the product and you get paid. With services,
Hmm.
you may get part of the money upfront, but
Right.
how often do you get paid for the complete project upfront? Because there's that good faith of, I will give you part of the money, but I want to see the final product before I give you that
Right.
last payment. So you want to take something like that into consideration. How many people are actually
Yeah.
thinking about the fact that, okay, well, when I land a client, that doesn't mean that I landed all the money. That just means that I landed a client. I need to figure out how to get them from saying, yes, I want to be able to work with you, to, this is a great experience, I can't wait to give you that final payment. Those are different
Right.
experiences. You have to know how to be able to get them from point A to point B. That customer journey is still part of that, and you have to know how to be able to navigate it.
No, I mean, this is all such valuable insight. And I can imagine, the businesses you work with, they are benefiting immensely from this.
Thank
If
you.
there's anything else that you would love audiences to walk away with, having listened to our conversation, Sean, what would that be?
One of the things that I definitely want people to understand is the people around you pay the biggest price. As much as you're paying when you're going through the changes of learning the entrepreneurship and getting your business off the ground, it's everybody around you that doesn't necessarily understand entrepreneurship. And so many people think, oh, you're going into business for yourself, that means you're going to have more time. When the reality is, you're going to have less time. So you're
Yeah.
asking them to sacrifice. Don't forget them in the process, because that's where so many entrepreneurs, you hear their story. And if you have a real conversation with them, how many people got left by the wayside because they were so focused on their business, and their relationships and their family things took a hit because they weren't around as much as they could. So go into it with the understanding of what your goals are, not just for yourself, but for the people around you. Because for the people around you, you're asking a lot of them. So you may have to figure out a way to be able to add in some work life balance so that you can make it to events and different things and start to be able to have that life in and out. Because if you just consume yourself with the role of being an entrepreneur, of running the business or owning the business or whatever variation that you come up with, you can end up having that be the only thing that you have at the end of the day.
I completely agree. I mean, when you go into a business venture, you're bringing your partners, you're bringing your family with you, especially if there's going to be financial implications. They need to sign off on that. There's going to be different ways that you're spending their time, different ways that you're
Mhm.
going to be emotionally available to them throughout the weeks. And everybody has to consent to that. I love looping everybody into the conversation and also being really intentional about making space for life and work. And as an entrepreneur, you don't have a 9 to 5. Start at 9, finish at 5, and then you do your after school activities. So because that is, again, being honest with yourself about all that the work is going to require of you, how can you make sure that you covet time
Mhm.
throughout your day to make time for yourself, make time for the things that matter outside of work. This is something I'm obviously incredibly passionate about,
Hmm.
which is why we built CalPal. But I think this is true, honestly, of folks who work in corporate environments too.
Yeah.
I mean, gone are the days where life and work are completely compartmentalized. Like life intersects work, your relationships intersect with work. These things are all very integrated. So acknowledge that, know yourself, know the process, the realities of the process, and then how do you create systems so that you can take care of yourself
Yeah.
and the people you love while you're building your businesses?
Absolutely. End of the day, you've seen the memes and things like that where it says, you know what, you could work yourself to death, and then they're just going to put up another job post. So
Yep.
it's the same thing with your business, with the exception of the fact that the business will go under. But legacy building, that's one of the reasons why I put it that way. So even if you're not, some people will create a business and then sell it off. Like whatever your goal is, it should leave an imprint, and one that is not a scar, but something that is left behind for people to be able to benefit from, and that's legacy building. Long after I'm gone, I know that there are people that I've been able to kind of point in the right direction, and I don't have to be there for them to cover every single bit of it. I just need to know that I gave them what they needed for them to get where they wanted to go, and then whatever they want to do with it from there, I'm just proud of them. So that's the biggest thing for me, and I just want to make sure that when people are pursuing that, that they don't lose everything else in the process. So there's a balance, and I always try to make sure that they recognize that balance and the ask that they're asking people, because I can speak from experience. Like I've lost people along the way of running this business, and I'm a workaholic. So if I'm honest, it may sound a little cold, but like if even if you ask me now with hindsight, I would probably still make the same decisions. But it's one of those things of I would have gone about it differently, because I don't wanna make what's important to me so important to me that I don't give the other person an option in making a decision for themselves. So I think it's
Oh,
really important that you allow them to be able to weigh in. They may not change what your end result is, but it's one of those things of like a lie of omission. Like if you don't give them the option to choose for themselves, then that's almost worse than lying to them, because
hmm,
you knew that you were taking something from them and you didn't give them a chance to be able to say, yes, you can have it, or no, you can't.
right.
When you're going into business, understand you're asking a lot of people. Just make sure that you check in with them to make sure that what you're asking is still okay. Because just because they said it
Yeah.
was okay in the beginning doesn't mean somewhere along the process that changed. And if you don't do that check in, you'll be basing it off of this, and you'll be missing all the signs of saying it's not okay.
Yeah, businesses evolve, as do people's needs. So, yeah, I love those constant check ins. So, so key. Well, Sean, thank you so much. If
Mhm,
folks want to learn more about Majority Media, how to get involved, how to get in touch with you about your
mhm.
services, what is the best way of going about that?
Sure. I used to butcher this one, so I had to fix it. And what I did is I just made a website with my name. So it's Sean M. Atkinson, and it is a entry point to all things Sean. So SEAN, M like Michael, ATKINSON.com. It will give you a introduction to some of my services. It will tell you how to find me on communities and platforms, coaching, all the different things that you choose your path. It's kind of a self-select. Whatever it is that you find interesting, if you want to be able to continue the conversation, there's a lot of ways to be able to do that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Sean. We'll include that in the show notes. Again, it's Sean spelled the correct way,
Mhm.
SEAN, just so folks don't get that
There you
confused.
go.
But this has been such a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much. And I look forward to talking to you again very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the Marginal Podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the team at CalPal with music by Siddhartha. If you like what you heard today, please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. You can view full episode show notes at marginalpodcast.com and follow us at Marginal Podcast on Instagram. Thank you so much, and we'll catch you next time.